Good morning, this is Angela with Parco's Permaculture. I'm filming from my car today. I know that y'all are pretty used to that. I had to drop my eldest kid off at work, and then I had to drive all the way down to inner southeast Portland, and here's where I live, here's where she works, here's my final destination for an appointment. And there wasn't enough time, and it didn't make sense to go home. I always try when I'm driving to really be conscious of my petroleum usage and not expend more miles driving than I have to. So I'm parked outside the orthodontist, and I have some time to make a video. I always bring my sewing or my knitting with me, and usually have an audiobook. And while I was sitting here, I just finished an audiobook that is one I've read for the second time, or consumed it for the second time. I should probably read it every few years instead of having 10 years between readings, because it's such a good book, and I wanted to share it with you. I promised y'all I would be talking more about books that I really enjoy in 2022, so this is one of those videos. So today I want to talk about intuitive eating. This is a fantastic book. It originally came out in 1995, and it's been updated, by the way, in many, many ways since then. So if you have access to it, read the most updated version. Well, it's really raining outside. We're back to regular Pacific Northwest weather here. Oh, I love the rain. Okay, so this book is about healing your relationship with food and healing the mind-body relationship. It is such a fantastic book. Now, I want to clarify here that obviously I am not a dietitian. I'm not a nutritionist. I'm not a food expert. I'm not a gastroenterologist. I can't speak to people who have, complicated health issues when it comes to their digestion. I just want to talk about this book and how it relates to permaculture. So permaculture is permanent agriculture. It is a system for growing our food, harvesting, processing, eating and enjoying our food, finding pleasure in our food, and doing so in a way that heals the planet at the same time that we are nourishing our bodies. It is so important, in my opinion, to have a healed, healthy, positive relationship with eating if we are going to practice good permaculture. Obviously, this falls under the umbrella of social permaculture, but again, it also falls under cultivating our food. And there's no way we can divorce growing food from the end result of our food choices and the way that we approach eating food. Now, this book is also a rejection of diet culture. So much in popular culture is antithetical to permaculture, is antithetical to sustainability, is just exploitive and degrading of both our bodies and the planet, and diet culture is no exception. So if we're going to embrace permaculture living, part of that is deconstructing from diet culture and rejecting fatphobia, and this book really touches on all of those things. So let me share a little bit about intuitive eating, what I gleaned from the book, and how I think it's been really important in the last 10 years, and again, I need to kind of reinforce it as diet culture continues to press on me, how I have used and understood intuitive eating to help me heal my relationship with food and find pleasure in the food that I grow and the way that I eat it. So let me start off by saying, I don't believe that any of us have a healthy, healed relationship with food. It's just really, really difficult in our modern culture. We may think that we do, but we all have some level of trauma, whether it is our parents forcing us to clean our plates. I know as a kid, I often, if I didn't finish my dinner, I was served the leftovers for breakfast the next day. And so I often would eat beyond fullness because I wanted to have, grape nuts for breakfast the next day instead of having to have, leftover cooked carrots and half of my, stir fry or whatever. And so we've often been taught to separate our natural hunger and fullness cues from our active eating. We've been told to shut off our ability to connect our brain to what our stomach is communicating to us. Maybe we grew up with food insecurity where cleaning the plate was really important and having no food waste was really important. Maybe we grew up with parents or, peers shaming our bodies, ridiculing our eating practices and the way that our bodies look. We all have broken ways of relating to food, and relating to our bodies, even when we've worked on it. The pervasive messages of diet culture, the pervasive messages of toxic food culture, the pervasive messages of wellness culture, which is just cloaked diet culture, in my opinion, all of those still press in on us. So this is an ongoing endeavor, I would say, much like when we practice permaculture in a consumer society. We have to function under the weight of unsustainable and damaging practices. And that means that we need to constantly check in with ourselves and make sure that we are not being influenced or we are not being burdened by that overarching larger culture toxic message that's coming in and, whispering in our ear a little bit. So obviously a disclaimer here, if you have a disordered relationship with food, if you have a diagnosed eating disorder, please work with your clinician and your therapist. Don't rely on what I'm saying here. Just know that this book has been really helpful for me over the years, and I just feel re-energized by consuming it again this past week. I think in permaculture, we can fall into a trap of orthorexia, which is a disordered relationship with food, where we have a hyper focus on clean eating, where we have a hyper focus on consuming the right foods. When we are committed to growing food sustainably, when we are committed to growing food without poisons, without poisoning the earth, without poisoning the soil microbiome, without poisoning our bodies, that can very easily bleed over into orthorexia, where we can become fixated on the cleanliness of our food. When we are focused on, in permaculture, seasonal eating, local food systems, it can be very easy for that to bleed over into a hyper focus on certain diet ideologies, be it veganism, be it paleo, be it hyperlocavore, be it really fixated, rigid food rules. And I want us to get away from that. Obviously, the book Intuitive Eating wants us to get away from that, but I want us to be aware that permaculture is not meant to be hyper rigid. It's not meant to bleed over into orthorexia, but just have an awareness when we're thinking about the ways that we grow our food and harvest it and eat it, that there is a potential for that to become disordered, and we need to check ourselves as we go along. I know for me, I can have a really rigid focus and a lot of judgment for myself when I eat junk food, or when I eat food that has a lot of plastic packaging, when I eat food that I know contains ingredients that were not grown or produced in a way that is healing to the planet. I can be really hard on myself. Instead of realizing, again, we live in a consumer culture and it's really difficult to do these things perfectly, and that I don't want to fall into orthorexia and focusing on clean eating to a point where it is disordered. Okay, so let's get into the book. So this book is about healing your relationship with your body and healing your relationship with food, and using 10 steps to do it. So let's knock down those 10 steps and how they relate to us as individuals, how they might be helpful for you in your social permaculture, in your care for yourself, and in your food production. So number 1 is reject diet mentality. Absolutely. Diet culture exists. It is rampant in regenerative agriculture groups. It is rampant in farming groups. It's rampant in permaculture. There is so much that I see in permaculture groups that equates fat with bad, both fat bodies and the eating of fat foods with badness. There is so much of diet culture that is pervasive, and we need to reject that, and we need to check our permaculture and make sure, is this really permaculture, or is it us being influenced by diet culture and fat phobia? Number 2 in intuitive eating, honor your hunger. So much in our culture tells us that we need to reject what our bodies are saying, and we need to eat on a rigid schedule, 3 meals a day. A lot of folks emphasize not eating after 6 or 7 p.m. at night. Much more permaculture aligned is to honor your hunger. We are observing and interacting with the world around us, and that includes observing and interacting with the signals that our body is communicating. For me, I've really shifted away from having 3 rigid meals where I have to consume everything that is put in front of me and I can't snack. I am much more of a graze a little bit here and there. If I eat a meal and an hour later my body is telling me like, Angela, we need some more fuel, we're still hungry, I will have a snack. I typically go for cheese. I love blue cheese. I love Stilton. If I need a little bit more protein, I'm going to honor what my body is saying, and I'm going to snack even if I just ate an hour ago. So using those permaculture principles of observe and interact, observe what your body is saying, interact with food appropriately. Number 3 is making peace with food. This is a really long process. I am still undergoing it. Like I said earlier, I tend to judge myself and I tend to have a less than peaceful relationship with certain kinds of food. This is a really long and elaborate step, and I encourage you to read it in the book. It looks really different depending on who you are and what trauma is in your background. Number 4 is challenge the food police. And if you practice permaculture and if you practice eating in a healthy way, you're going to encounter this all the time. I tend to relapse with this a lot. The food police can be external forces, other folks criticizing your body shape and criticizing what you're eating, criticizing your choice to have a second or third helping of something, even if your body is saying we need more of that. The food police can also be internal, an internal dialogue where you are having a conversation with yourself that is really judgmental and is policing the way you are eating. Number 5 is discover satisfaction in food. This is a really big one. Food is pleasurable. Food is not just fuel. Our process of eating food, if we eat alone, it can be a pleasurable interaction. Our brains, our mouths, our bodies can take joy in the food that we are eating. And so much more so, I've talked about this a lot on this channel, myself and my children, we find that we have a much greater enjoyment of the food if we grew it ourselves, if we harvested it with our own hands. Spreading honey on a biscuit when it is honey that I have harvested from my own bees and biscuits that I have made from scratch is so much more satisfying to me. There's so much pleasure for me in that whole experience because I have produced the food myself, or I've harvested it myself, or I have kneaded the dough with my own hands. All of that is so much more satisfying to me and adds to the pleasurable experience at the end. There is so much more pleasure. The eating experience is pleasurable, but in terms of the permaculture experience, the pleasure of having planted and grown and nurtured a plant, or having cared for my honeybees and then harvesting the honey, or having interacted and loved my ducks and chickens and then eating their eggs that I know are produced from kitchen scraps so that there's no waste in the process. All of the layers of that adds to the pleasurable experience of eating the dish at the end. I find for me, since I have really started trying to grow more of my own food, that my enjoyment of food at the end is really increased. Like the whole experience of eating is so much more pleasurable for me now. Eating slowly, savoring all of the layers of flavor, eating with friends and family so that eating is a social experience, taking the time to eat slowly and talk with those around me about what the food experience is, all of that heightens the pleasure of it. Food is not just fuel. There's nothing wrong with taking pleasure in living. We should be taking pleasure in living, and eating is part of living. Number 6 is feel your fullness. And this is a really big one. I talked about this earlier. Our diet culture and maybe trauma from our childhood has really severed this connection between our brains and our stomachs, so that it's really hard for us to honor our fullness. We are often taught to eat beyond fullness. We live in a culture where very few infants are breastfed on demand. Very few of them go through child-led weaning. Kids are taught to finish the bottle, whether or not that honors their hunger cues. So from infancy, many of our kids are taught to reject their natural fullness cues and override those. And it can be a long process to learn to reconnect. Am I really full right now? Am I eating beyond fullness because I've been told to clear my plate? Am I eating beyond fullness because I've had food insecurity in the past and I have historically not been sure where my next meal is coming from? Am I eating beyond fullness because I have been told by adults in my life that I am disrespecting the fact that other people have food insecurity if I don't finish my plate, and that I am wasting money if I don't finish all of the food. A little caveat here. This is one of the reasons that we have ducks and chickens, so that my kids and I and my husband don't ever have to feel that we have to eat beyond fullness. So in terms of, if you don't clear your plate, you're creating waste. You're wasting money, you're wasting resources. Ducks and chickens can eat what we can't store as leftovers. If my kids leave food on their plate and they say, "I'm full, Mom, I don't want to eat anymore," I know that my chickens and ducks can turn that into eggs that we can enjoy down the road. So that is one way that we have kind of created a system within our household to circumvent that kind of historic childhood trauma that I know that I have, where I really stress about wasting food and wasting money. I know that it is a food source for my ducks and chickens, and they will give me eggs in return. In order to feel our fullness, we really have to do a lot of work to heal from past trauma. And so much of social permaculture is learning to heal trauma in our past. And that really changes the way we interact with ourselves and the way we interact with each other, especially in terms of conflict, in terms of assuming positive intent, in terms of having real community. So I find that when we work through these 10 kind of steps of intuitive eating and we do that labor, the yield from it, permaculture principle, obtain a yield, the yield from it is really multitudinous, right? It's on many levels. It's that stacking functions when we do the work of healing from our trauma in our past in order to have a better relationship with our bodies and with food. We are healing on many, many layers, and that has benefits for how we interact with our children, making sure we don't pass food trauma onto our kids, eating trauma onto our kids. And it helps us heal from a lot of things in our past that influence the way we now interact with people, and we can have a better relationship with others. So the benefits are greater than just our relationship with our bellies. Number 7, cope with your emotions with kindness. So what I just said about the way we work on healing from our trauma has implications beyond just our relationship with food. It helps us in our mental well-being and the way we interact with our families and the way we interact with our community and relationships with other people. That's going to apply for basically everything else on this list, 6 through 10. So number 7, when you have emotions around eating, treat yourself with kindness. Emotions are really neutral and they just come up, and it's how you respond to your emotions that can take you in various directions. But realizing that eating is an emotional process, the way we relate to our bodies is an emotional relationship. So when we have those emotions come up, examining them, holding the emotion away from us, examining the emotion without judgment, and being kind to ourselves and knowing that those emotions will pop up when we least expect it is so important. And that skill of taking an emotion, not applying judgment, and just looking at it and thinking about what we want to do next, whether we want to let that emotion go or whether we need to act on it, that is a skill that benefits us everywhere in life. Number 8, respect your body. I would also add respect everybody else's body. Please don't police other people's body shapes and how they choose to eat food. Respect your own body. This is a really big one. Y'all, this is so hard for me. I'm somebody who is 6 feet tall. Growing up, I was a thin person with thin privilege, but I always felt fat. I was much bigger than most of my friends. Some of my best friends were like 5'2", like a size 0. And I felt that I took up a lot of space. Being a woman in America, if you take up space, everybody lets you know it and they comment on your body shape. And so it was so easy for me to have a disordered relationship with my body from the get-go, even though I am completely packed full of thin privilege for the majority of my life. I still had a disordered relationship with my body and how I viewed my body. I just felt big all the time in a negative way, as if big equaled negative. So learning to respect your body is a long, ongoing process. And for me, it's been really huge to just think about the fact that my body carries me through life every day. My body undergoes a lot of stress. My body is resilient. My body carts me around and gets done the things that I need to get done. And that's been so important for me to keep touching back in with myself and say, Like, my body's actually a wonderful thing. So that's a really long, big, complicated step for a lot of us, but it's a really important one. Ongoing work. It's ongoing work. Number 9 in intuitive eating is feel the movement that you're undertaking. Exercise isn't just about pounding out the calorie expenditure. Exercise is about honoring how your body is moving in space, what that feels like. Maybe you want to slow down. Exercise is about interacting with the world around you. I am doing the 1,000-mile challenge, which is not to be pedantic. And if I don't hit 1,000 miles at the end of the year, who cares? It's about me being out walking in the outdoors every single day if I possibly can, and learning to sit with my thoughts or perhaps listen to a good book or podcast while I walk and observing nature. It's about slowing down and running less, because running hurts certain parts of my body, and I was running more to deal with other emotions. And so now I'm learning to respect the movement process and feel the movement. So learning that exercise is not about burning calories. Exercise is about moving our bodies and interacting with the world around us is really healing. Number 10 is honor your health and practice gentle nutrition. This one I think is super important for us in permaculture because, as I said earlier, I can be prone to this, and I've seen other folks in permaculture can be prone to this overlap of permaculture and orthorexia, where we can just really focus on clean eating and right eating. And there can be a lot of moral judgment in our food choices. And I think permaculture needs to release itself from that. I firmly believe that everybody has a right to nutritionally dense food and a good, healthy diet. That is not the same thing as judging food choices. I like to criticize and firmly believe in criticizing an industrial food complex that produces waterless, pithy, flavorless food that is devoid of nutrition. When we eat an egg that is battery produced eggs, they are lower in various essential vitamins and minerals than free range organic eggs that we've let our chickens and ducks produce themselves. When we eat a commercially hothouse produced vegetable, they are often much lower in vitamins and minerals that our bodies need to function and for us to feel good and to feel healthy and to be healthy. So demanding our right to nutritionally dense food, demanding that folks in food deserts actually get access to nutritionally dense food so that they can care for their bodies and honor their bodies, is entirely different than judging somebody for choosing to eat junk food or for us to judge ourselves. So we don't have to eat right all of the time to be healthy. We don't have to make great dietary choices all of the time to be healthy. We can make mistakes. We can have junk food. I mean, if you saw my video on my sister channel, I cook a fair amount with sugar. I don't have any problem cooking with sugar. I try and source my sugar as sustainably grown whenever I can afford it, sustainably harvested and with fair labor whenever I can afford it. But I don't try and moralize different food choices. But I do say that there is a difference. Some foods for me are junk foods because they are low nutrient content, and folks are being deceived. They think they're eating something that is good for them and it is lacking the nutrition that their bodies are craving. But I think a really important part of our permaculture, so we don't become pedantic, is that we remember that we don't have to eat perfectly to be healthy, and neither does everybody else, particularly functioning in a culture with an industrial food complex where profit is the motivation and not having a healthy relationship with our bodies and not honoring our bodies. Okay, well, it's time for me to go into my appointment. So let me just wrap up here and say, doing the work of reconnecting your brain and your body in honoring the way that your body needs food and honoring the way that we produce food, harvest it, and have a pleasurable experience and often a social experience eating food. All of that is good permaculture. That's good social permaculture. It has ripples that impact the way that we function in community when we do the work of healing our own trauma and repairing our relationship with food. It creates a base layer that helps us heal our relationships in other areas of life. So I would encourage you, as you are practicing your permaculture, think about intuitive eating. Think about maybe considering picking up this book, and think about the relationship you have not only with the earth, healing the relationship you have with the earth and the cultivation of the food that you are harvesting, but also healing the relationship with your body and the way that you are enjoying the food that you have so carefully grown. It's so good for me to try and tie other books I read into permaculture because there's connection everywhere. And the things that we consume can be tied back into permaculture because permaculture design is overarching for every area of life. And the same way that we are looking for the connection between our mind and our gut and our stomach and our cues that our body is communicating to us, we can find and honor the connection between eating and the rest of permaculture. As always, thanks for hanging out through this long video. If you are interested in supporting this channel, I have a Patreon down in the description, and I will be back from my garden later this week. I hope you take the opportunity to read Intuitive Eating. I only spoke to my own experience here and intuitive eating as it relates to permaculture, but the book itself goes so much more in depth into the process of healing our relationship with food. I hope you will give it a read.